Hi everybody, Dr. Lauren Tessier here of Life After Mold, located in quaint Waterbury, Vermont. Wanting today to answer another question that comes up a lot for people, and that is how to find a good IEP or indoor environmental professional. So what I'm going to go over in this video is more or less what has worked for me personally and professionally, how I went about finding my IEP, and also how some of my clients from different areas around the country have found a good and reliable IEP. This is not going to be the answer all of the time. This is not going to be the answer for everyone. And these are just some suggestions, but I really want to remind people that it is possible to find a good IEP out there. You really just need to take your time. You need to do your research. You need to not rush in and really try to open up the lines of communication. So first of all, what we have to consider is where to look. And I have a couple of areas that I like sending people to. There might be other places where people can search. Like I said, this is not the end-all be-all of suggestions. This is just something to get you started. So one of the first places I do send people is the ACAC.org. So Apple Cat, ACAC.org. And so here is it's a certification website for a lot of different fields, but a lot of mostly indoor environmental certifications. And so what I encourage people to do is go to the section that says find certificates or certified practitioners or certified professionals, and then you go to search by location. Type in your zip code, and then there will be a list of names that pop up. And so the short and sweet can be looking for the people with the most credentials after their name. And that isn't always a guarantee at all. You can still have someone who might have a lot of credentials that might not have the best bedside manner or house-side manner, I guess. And you need to keep that into consideration. So for instance, the IEP that I refer to, I worked through my local list and I called all these different places, and he was the person who got on the phone with me. And we talked for a while, and I was in the position of being a physician looking for a place to safely refer my clients to. So I do believe that I had that going for me when it came to networking. But my IEP in particular also sits on the ACAC board, and he happens to have the following designations, which is the CIA QM, the CIEC, and the CRMI. So some of these are the Certified Indoor Environmental Consult, Certified Microbial Investigator, Certified Residential Mold Inspector, and then there's other great IEPs out there who have certifications through different places, so not through the ACAC. They might be a BPI-BAEP, which is a Building Performance Institute building analyst and envelope professional. And so what I tell people is it's probably a good idea to find someone on the ACAC and use that list to start from. And copy down those phone numbers or, print it out, set it aside for yourself, and then you can kind of call them and cross-check certain things. So the other thing to take into consideration is that some of these designations have a requirement for time spent in field. And if you float over the letters that come up in the certification section of the the listing, you'll see that some of them will be like, must serve 2 years in field, must serve 8 years in field. So it's always a good sign to probably want to chat with someone who's had the 8 years in field versus the 2, but from that same perspective, you never know who's just getting started, who's really passionate about their work, and who really wants to help people. Everyone starts somewhere, so you might find someone great who is fresh out of training. So keep that in mind. So then another place that you can look for IEPs, or indoor environmental professionals, would be at ICI.org. Now, ICI is the International Society for Environmentally Acquired Illness. It's a nonprofit. I'm the current vice president in the year 2019 through potentially 2020. And there we do have a mix of different providers, some medical, some, of all different backgrounds. And then we also have IEPs there. So if you go to the Find a Professional page, scroll to the bottom, you will find the section that says Indoor Environmental Professional, and there'll be some names to choose from there. And, I think that people listed on both websites could be a really great place to start with. So grab those phone numbers too, add that to your pile, and then over the next few days, potentially sit down and call each one locally. And I have a list of questions that I'll walk you through, so that way you can see if you guys are really a good match or not. Now, some people have questions about building biology. And I think that building biology is a really great field. I think that there is a lot of good information in it that can be really helpful for people. They're one of the few frontiers that I believe are working with EMF, which can be really big in my patient population. So I encourage people, if you can find someone that has a building biology certification or training, that's great. But I also like seeing people certified through the ACAC. So building biology in addition to ACAC certification, that might be a good one to call. So here's where the kicker is. We're all busy. We're all busy. You're busy. I'm busy. The IEP is busy. Their front desk person is busy. However, communication is really important. When you call these people, be kind, be direct, and also let them know that you're really hopeful to work with them. People are going to be more intrigued to share information with you and tell you things when they're not hit with a defensive, when they don't have to rise to meet you defensively to prove themselves as a professional. And this might be like, well, of course, kind of like no duh kind of thing for some of you out there, but I think a lot of us, when we're sick, we're always like worried of like, who's going to take advantage of us, what's gonna happen, can I trust this person? And in this situation, it is reasonable to fake it until you make it. Be kind, be direct, and let them know that you're hopeful to work with them. Like that, you get more attraction to have people willing to answer your questions and interact with you when you're warm and you're genuine. So, just a little reminder there. You guys don't have to, come out swinging. And if you don't like someone's answers, walk away. It's a really nice thing when someone lets you know that you're not a match for them. You're like, okay, thanks. You saved me some time. Moving on. So, when you make these calls, you also want to be aware that, like I said, everyone's busy. You're busy, I'm busy, IEPs are busy, their staff is busy. So questions might not come directly from the IEP themselves. It might be a staff member that knows this information. It might be a staff member that is honest and say, hey, I don't know, but I would love to find the answer for you. That's a really good sign too. What is not a good sign is a staff member that's curt with you or rude with you, or even if the IEP themselves refuses to answer your question, then you don't want to interact with them. And the reason why I say this is because my clients who need that thorough remediation on their home need to really make sure they're paired with someone who is going to communicate well, who is going to be patient with them, especially in the world of, moldy brain and brain fog and difficulty focusing and difficulty concentrating. Like, you might have to ask an IEP to repeat something 3 or 4 times for clarity, and you really want to know that these people have the capability to communicate with you in a healthy and positive manner. And if you get that vibe that that's not going to be a good match from you, even just on the phone, then you need to follow your intuition on that. So with that being said, some professionals might invite you to do an exploratory question and answer session to try to get to see if you're a good fit for them, and vice versa. And sometimes those sessions are a paid session, and that's totally reasonable, because a lot of my folks tend to have really big questions or really big concerns or things that might be specific to their home and their situation in particular that really need that little bit of added attention. So please be open to the fact that an IEP might say, hey, this is a really big conversation that you have. Let's do a paid phone consult or something like that. So please don't be driven away from that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So what you should be able to get from just information from people is the following questions. So kind of when I was mentioning the exploratory consults and questions and answers, that's for someone who needs a bit more attention and support. And so if you are finding that you have an IEP that seems really nice and responsive, and you kind of just want to rattle off a few questions to get to know them, to see if they're a match for you, or if their staff, if their staff's the one answering the phones, the following questions are going to be really important. And so take your time, go back, re-listen to this, replay it, so you can get all these questions down, okay? So the first one, it might be something that you want to save to the end, but for me it's important. I want to know if they've worked with people who are sick from mold exposure in indoor environments. So if someone does mostly, insurance, house claims, not that that's a bad thing, but they might not be the perfect match. It's really good for you to find someone who's worked with people who are ill from mold exposure, because they know what to expect and they kind of know the thoroughness that they need to have with their identification and with their remediation plan and with their communication. So, just asking first and seeing if that's something that they've ever experienced. And in this case, getting into the nitty-gritty of, well, have you worked with SIRS versus have you worked with mycotoxicosis versus have you worked with allergy versus, fungal infection. At that point, I think it's a moot point to bring up the particular issue that you're struggling with, simply because there are plenty of people who have anaphylaxis reactions to molds, and a little bit of mold is really problematic for them. And similarly, people who have mycotoxicosis issues, a little bit of mold and mycotoxins can be a really bad thing for them. So it's just the fact of how used to dealing with people who are ill are they? Okay, so second question is, what is the scope of your investigation? It's really important that they check out the exterior of the house. The roof. Are there any shingles missing? What does the chimney flashing look like? What do the hips on the roof look like? You name it. How does the window frame look? Is the certain side of the house getting more sun, or there's tree cover and more dampness there, or even like what's happening with the French drains around the house and the drainage around the house. So you always want someone to start with an outdoor inspection. And then once they get indoors, you want to make sure that they are looking in every room in the house. I have heard horror stories of people who will come in and they'll go, looks fine, smells fine, you're good. And they won't do any testing. And in reality, like some of the more dangerous issues with mold, mycotoxins, they don't smell. They don't necessarily have to trigger the olfactory nerve. So if someone's just depending on vision and smell alone, you gotta cut them loose. You gotta run the other way. The other issue with that is, mold can be growing in walls. It can be growing in places where you wouldn't expect. And so if people are just going to do that first pass and they're not going to look at every room, that's going to be not someone you want to work with. And additionally, you want to make sure that they will also test the places you want them to test. And so if you say, I get a headache in my son's room, and they go in and they don't see anything in there, they might not want to test because they don't want to incur cost for you, but you really need to make sure that wherever you feel poorly, they're going to be willing to test. So that's one of the things that you want to ask them. And you also want to see if they're going to look into the ventilation systems in your home, the active ventilation and the passive. So are they peeking in the attic to check to make sure your soffits and your ridge cap are communicating and doing good passive ventilation? Or are they checking to see if the active air exchanger in your basement or in your crawl space is functioning? You really want someone to not only grasp outdoor, indoor, room by room, but also all the ventilation, all the places in the house where it naturally breathes. And then, of course, you also want to make sure that they're going to be paying attention to any areas of the house that might move water, hold water, engage with water, divert water, because those are going to be areas where there's going to be a likely water intrusion that could be causing issues. So with that being said, you also want to make sure that they are going to do a thorough history on your home. The same way that my patients come into me and we talk about everything from, back from childhood illnesses all the way to where they are today, you better believe you want someone to be asking you these things about your own house. Your house is a living, breathing entity, and it really needs to be treated as such. So they should be asking about prior flooding issues or prior repairs, because even a repair could be a problematic issue, unexpected issue where water intrusion comes from. So that's something that you want them to do, is take a thorough history of the house. Now, the other thing, and don't be surprised when you guys get a little bit of a reaction out of this, the other thing is asking them what type of testing do they do. And the type of testing will likely be air testing and tape lift. They will likely say that. Some people will opt to use DNA testing, MSQ-PCR. It's a long story for taking a little mold fragment, making the DNA longer, and being able to identify species. So the major type of MSQ-PCR that people use is through the ERMI. Now, there's the ERMI and the HERTSMI. Go with the ERMI, because you can always calculate the HERTSMI off the ERMI. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I can always make another video about this. Let us know, comment, and I can double back and talk a little bit more about that. So you're going to want to make sure that they're willing to do an ERMI for you. And so don't be surprised if at first they go, ERMIs are an archaeological dig. Why do I want to know what's not in the air and what's in the dust? And they're not wrong. They're not wrong. It's a reasonable argument. But what I like about the ERMI is that it tells us, it has that DNA component. So it tells us the species. It tells us, not just it's an Aspen, so Aspergillus penicillium group, but what type of Aspergillus or what type of penicillium, because some of them are really dangerous and some of them are safer. And if you have a house full of Aspergillus fumigatus, you're going to want to know, and you're not going to want to have to confuse it with a less dangerous penicillium. So that's why I like using the ERMI with people. A lot of folks out there will also dislike the concept of an ERMI score. So ERMIs will have this score of there's this whole thing of it has to be 2 or below for proper recovery. And the reality is there can be sampling errors that shift that number. There can be higher numbers of one than the other that makes a house look really safe or makes a house look dangerous, even though it might not be all that bad. So that's something to take into consideration. So if you ask them what type of testing they do, and then you follow up with, would you do an IRMI for me? And they ho-hum, and that's okay. Just tell them that the reason why is that the physician that you want to work with wants to know what type of species is present. And usually they won't argue with that. You know, if they understand that you're not just going off a simple number for safety, and they understand that we're looking at species and their health effects, they usually get behind it, for sure. And the other reason why I like IRMI, because of the dust sample, is that one of the more dangerous molds, Stachybotrys, the spores are really kind of sticky. And because of that, they're not airborne easily. They really need to take a really big they need to get really roughed up to get airborne. And so if you're going around with an air pump and you're sucking an air sample into the air pump, you might not catch Stachy, even though, you know, it could be in the other room, or it could be in wall or something like that, or could be low around the toilet basin and not up in the air. So, you know, I like the IRMI for that reason. And they might say, well, just do an MSQ PCR. Sure, that's fine. We don't need the IRMI. The reason why I use the IRMI is for that DNA identification. And if they want to do that with just an MSQ PCR alone and they don't want to bother with the IRMI scoring, totally fine. So that will be the testing question. The other thing that you want to ask them, in addition to will you test where I feel ill, is do you have the ability to do in-wall samples? And this is really important. I've seen personally firsthand in-wall samples be done correctly and in-wall samples done incorrectly. Thankfully, the IEP that I work with is phenomenal, and he uses a sterile tube. He drills a small hole in the wall, and a lot of IEPs won't want to do this because they have to damage your property. They do have to drill a hole in the wall in order to gain access and do that testing. So you have to be okay with that, and you need to make that very, very clear to them that that's what you want. So there should be a sterile tube that goes into the hole in the wall and comes back to the air vacuum. And there's a certain setting, it's a higher rate setting that pulls that air from that cavity. So they should be aware of how to take a proper in-wall sample. And you don't have to educate them. You say, oh, do you use a sterile tube for in-wall sampling? Period. That's all you need to do. And if they say yes or no, personally, I have asked, not my IEP, someone else I had to deal with for insurance purposes for the house. They took the air vent, the air vacuum, punched a hole in the wall about that big, and then they proceeded to put the air pump up to the hole. And if you guys know anything about like air pull and conduction, it's not going to put enough drag on that. And so he was more or less doing it to humor me, not realizing that, you know, I have a great IEP who educated me on how it's done properly. And I was just totally mortified because I knew that there was mold in that wall because of previous testing. And it's like, didn't even want to test for it. So, you know, I've been on each side of this. When I say I know, I really mean that I know. So, you know, making sure, like I said, to double back, will you test where I feel poorly? Are you willing to do an in-wall sample? Do you use a sterile tube to collect the specimen? Next question that you want them to answer, is do you write a remediation plan? You know, do you take the information that you've garnered and do you put together a plan for me to bring to a remediation company so I can properly fix my house? And they absolutely should. And if you're not crazy about the remediation plan or you have questions about it, you can always ask for a second opinion from a different IEP. That's fine. And then the next question that you want to check on is, do you have a remediation company you suggest? And this one is a trick question, because if they say, yes, my company does remediation, you need to run for the hills. You need to get out of there, because that is a conflict of interest. So if they do testing and they find all these high levels of mold and then you do a remediation and spend thoroughly on this, and then they come back and they test and it's all clear, we did a great job. They could be looking the other way to get a clear testing after they've done the remediation. So that is a complete conflict of interest. Any IEP worth their salt knows that they should not be doing that. So, and any remediation company too, you will know a good IEP and a good remediation company when they keep those two worlds separate. With that being said, some IEPs can name some remediation companies that they really feel do a good job. Ask them for their expertise, tell them, hey, you know these things, like you have a lot of great contacts, like do you have a remediation company who gets it, who knows how to really take care of a sick home, and listen to them. And you can get this information from each IEP and kind of amass this information and go through it, and you might see a couple of yeses pointing to one particular remediation company, and you might see a couple of yeses from remediation companies pointing back towards IEPs. So that might be a good sign. And so the other thing that you want to ask them is, do you do a PRV, a post remediation verification? So it's testing that happens where they come in, they test to see how good the remediation company did, and then if it's good, then great. And if it's not, then the remediation company has to come back in and remediate to whatever standard that was set and agreed upon. And so it's really important, you guys see why now, to really have those two different worlds. So, there's so many questions that you can ask in IEP, and you have to be mindful that, the day that you call them might not be the best day for them time-wise. You might have to call back a couple of different times with a couple of different questions. You might have to be comfortable with their staff answering some of these questions for you. But if at any point in time you're like, man, this is really poor communication, or they're not willing to answer any of these questions for you, you gotta move on. There's plenty of other IEP fish in the sea, and a lot of people who really want to help other people. The final thing that I do ask people, and I didn't want to forget about this, I want to make sure that you guys hear this, is what type of tools do you bring? So remember how I said some IEPs will come in and they'll do a visual inspection and they'll say, well, I don't see anything, I don't smell anything, you don't have to test. That's problematic. So you should really be hearing people say, yeah, we bring tools. And you'll say, oh, which ones, would you mind? And they'll say a particle counter, absolutely a must. A thermal camera, thermal imaging or infrared camera, absolutely a must. A hygrometer or a humidity percentage measuring tool is also something that is really necessary. And there might be a few other things that unfortunately I might be missing right now, but the thermal imaging camera is really something special, because if you can get a thermal snapshot of a wall and you can see that it's high in one place and low in another, and there's a thermal drop, with thermal drop can come condensation. And so that's why you'll see cold pipes really get that condensation in the summer. And so let's say you have a cold drainage pipe running through some drywall, and you can image that and you see, oh wow, like there could be condensation in that wall, let's test around that pipe. That's why these tools are so important, and that's why you have to have someone who's willing to apply themselves, who knows a bit about construction, who knows a bit about building science, and who knows obviously about the indoor environment and air quality and testing. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening in. I hope this is really helpful for some of you to at least get started. It's not uncommon for me when I work with people to get them to do all their house stuff first. I do offer people on-ramp sessions, and an on-ramp session is a 30 minutes with me in discussion of what's happening at a highly reduced rate versus what I normally charge, and that's 30 minutes to kind of get all your ducks in order. And so a lot of this information I find myself repeating, in these on-ramp sessions, like, this is how you find a good IEP, get your house tested, come back, and so I'm really happy to put this out there so that people can kind of get this and scoot forward. And so if you still have questions, you're always welcome to schedule an on-ramp with me through my office, and you can keep an eye out for other videos that I will be posting, and you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on Instagram. All of those will be at Life After Mold. And on those social media platforms, I tend to, post some cool research or mold health related things or mold news, things like that. So please be sure to go check those out. A lot of times I'll run deals and specials there and advertise those for folks. I share my newsletters on there too, and you guys are also welcome to go to my website and once again download that Mold Prevention 101 e-booklet, so that way you guys can be aware of the different things in your house that might be conducive to mold growth. So you can even take this document and kind of read through it and then walk through your own home and do a little bit of a check and see how you add up and how you maintain your home. So that's the Mold Prevention 101 ebook on my website, and my website is www.lifeaftermold.com. Once again, lifeaftermold.com. And if you have any questions about establishing care as a patient or even establishing as a educational consult as a client, you guys are welcome to head over to my website, hit up that contact page, and reach out to us through there. So with that being said, thank you guys so much. Feel free to post some questions in the comment section, and I will try to keep knocking out videos here and there. Okay, thank you guys, and please share this to whoever you feel needs it. Thank you. Bye.